Thor Ragnarok is my favourite Marvel film. The director, Taika Waititi, manages to complete the third chapter of Thor's character arc, while taking the film in a completely different direction to its predecessors. The script, often improvised, is brilliant, the soundtrack is amazing, and every fourth shot looks like it's the cover of a heavy metal album. It is a brilliantly refreshing take on Thor, who previously had come across as a little prosaic and one-dimensional. However, none of that is the reason that Ragnarok is my favourite. I love Thor Ragnarok because of one short scene about a third of the way through the film between Hela and Scourge.
Odin, proud to have it, shamed of how we got it.
To explain why this is important to me, we're going to have to rewind a little. Just over 250 years ago, then Lieutenant James Cook embarked on the first of his 3 voyages of discovery around the Pacific. The original purpose of this first voyage was to sail to Tahiti and observe the transit of Venus, a celestial event that wasn't due to occur again for more than 100 years. Having done this, he opened his second secret set of orders, which was, basically, to go discover Australia, which, after a quick and almost fatal circumnavigation of New Zealand, he did. Now, Cook's achievements are impressive. His legacy, though, is controversial. The instructions he received from the Admiralty were to, with the consent of the natives, take advantage of convenient situations in the country in the name of the King of Great Britain. His interpretation of this was to ignore the million-odd Aboriginal inhabitants of Australia and declare the continent to be terra nullius, a legal term meaning land belonging to no one. He planted the flag on August 22nd, 1770, and claimed it for the British Empire. This was disastrous for the Aboriginal Australians and their culture. Over the next 100 years, 90% of their population was wiped out through massacres, disease, often purposefully spread by the colonisers, and starvation as they were violently displaced from the more fertile lands in Australia to make way for sheep. So what does this have to do with why I like Thor Ragnarok? Well, let's have a quick look at Hela. By this point in the film, Hela has already established her motivation. Our destiny is to rule over all others, she tells the Asgardians. She wants to create a second Asgardian empire, or rather, expand the current one. Asgard already is an empire, as she points out in this scene in the throne room. Here, she literally uncovers the truth of Asgard's past by destroying the new mural and revealing the old. She also tells us that Odin, who has been our main source of information for the previous 2 films, is an unreliable narrator. And you can see that this is new information to Scourge, who here represents both the audience and the other Asgardians. He looks genuinely shocked at the image of Asgard being built by slaves. The answer to Hela's question, does no one remember our history, is apparently a resounding no. By introducing this aspect into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Taika Waititi is holding a mirror up to our own uncomfortable colonial past. I saw Thor Ragnarok in a cinema in Piccadilly Circus in London, and while London was not built by slaves, it was funded by them. Slavery was a huge part of the British Empire's economy. When it was finally outlawed in 1833, the Treasury paid 40% of their income that year in compensation, not to the people who had been enslaved, but to their owners, for the loss of their so-called business assets. Today, you can go and look up precisely who received that money, and as someone whose ancestors lived in the United Kingdom at the time, that is not a fun experience to go through. Taika didn't just make decolonization part of the theme of the movie though, it was also an important part of the filming process. Thor Ragnarok was filmed mostly in Australia, and the first thing that happened on set was a traditional welcome to country given by the Yagamba people of southeast Queensland. 8 Indigenous filmmakers were also present as interns, and the 2 main spaceships, Valkyries and the Grand Masters, were painted with the colours of the Aboriginal and Tino Rangitirotanga flags, respectively, while avoiding the designs to make sure that these symbols didn't become commercialised. When speaking to BuzzFeed News in Australia, Taika Waititi said, "It's a responsibility you have to the Indigenous people. You're coming to a country and you're bringing money into the economy and creating jobs, but I think you have an even bigger responsibility to look after the people that have less opportunities." It says a lot that here Taika is acknowledging that this is the Indigenous experience, that the children of colonisers have more opportunities afforded them than the descendants of Indigenous or enslaved people. It can be hard to see this privilege when you have it, especially for people living in centres like London, far removed from the colonial outskirts of the former British Empire. But the evidence is there, in statues, in murals, and in museums. As Hela says at the end of the film, where do you think all this gold came from? Here in the real world, it looks like we're finally starting to engage with these issues. Thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, among others, conversations about decolonisation are becoming much more common than they were in 2017 when Ragnarok was released. At the time, I was shocked that there was such anti-colonial rhetoric in a big-budget American film. It seemed subversive, and I remember wondering how Taika Waititi had gotten away with it. Today, the messaging in Ragnarok feels mild in comparison to the protests we've seen in America and around the world. But I think it was evidence that the decolonisation project was starting to gain some mainstream momentum. To me, Thor Ragnarok was a small but important step to getting to the point that we're at now, where people are not just opening their eyes, but starting to take action as well.